Good evening, friends, and welcome to Sleepy Time Tales, a podcast aimed at helping you to get a good night's sleep. Do you find your mind plagued with the stresses of modern life, especially when the lights are out and you're trying to get a restful night? Does your spinning mind keep you awake? Follow my voice down the path towards a good night's rest. Listen to me tell a story that will keep your mind from wandering to your daytime problems. The ones you can't solve right now and will be easier to solve well rested. Listen to my voice and allow yourself to drift, following the twists and turns of the story, but slowly letting go and drifting into sleep. A quick note for new listeners. If this is your first time joining us, part of the plan with the show is a long intro. This intro usually goes on for roughly 15 minutes. So if you want to get straight to the story, there is a timestamp in the show notes and the show description that will get you straight there. But aside from the little bit of promotion I'm about to go into now, the intro does serve a purpose, which I think is quite important, and I'll explain in a few minutes. I'd recommend, especially if this is your first few nights, stick around for the whole thing just to get a sense of it. Now, many podcasts put their promotional stuff and their cup rattling halfway through or at the end. But because if all things go well, you will probably be asleep well before the end or the halfway point of the show. So I need to get the uncomfortable stuff up front. If you don't want to listen to it, as I said, there is the timestamp in the show notes. And do not take it personally if you skip to that. Having said that, I'd like to thank the listeners that support the show or have ever supported the show on Patreon. You have all been instrumental in helping me to keep the show running. Whether you've backed the show for 1 month or a few months, at any level, I am grateful for every bit of support I've received. And if you're finding that the show helps you to get a good night's sleep, whether it's weekly, nightly, or however often you listen, and you would like to help me to keep the show running and available for free for everybody so I can continue to help hundreds of people to get a good night's sleep, I'd like to request that you take a good look at patreon.com/sleepytimetales, which you will find linked in the show notes, to take a look at the support levels and bonuses that are available to patrons from as little as $1 a month. Those go from weekly bonus minisodes to special edits of the main episodes, which may suit your needs more specifically. And if you're finding it beneficial and have the means and inclination to help me keep the show going and available to help a lot of people to get a good night's sleep, please consider signing up at whatever level is comfortable to you to continue supporting my work. In the long run, I really would like to do this full time. I'd like to release more episodes and do more interesting and more creative things with a little bit more time. But that is a long-running thing, a long-term plan. Right now, I would just like to try to keep my costs covered so that I'm not out of pocket every month. Again, if you can, if it's comfortable to you and you want to, please consider signing up on Patreon. But there are other ways to help besides just handing out money. Another big way you can help is just to simply spread the word. If there's someone you know, someone in your life who you think will benefit from listening to Sleepy Time Tales, let them know. And if you recommend the show to anyone on social media, make sure to tag me in. I'm at Sleepy Time Tales on Instagram or Twitter. And so I can thank you for your support. Last but not least, before we get back to the main show, is the shout out to the music, which is Un Desire by Kumiku. Their music is available on the Free Music Archive. I've linked their website and their Patreon in the show notes, as they've got some very cool stuff, which they release under different names incidentally. So if you notice that I haven't linked to something called Kumiku, it's not a mistake. I'm sending you in the right place. I recommend taking a look. There's some pretty cool stuff there. Thanks for taking the time to listen. Back to the show. So what exactly is Sleepy Time Tales? What is it for? It's a bit of a strange idea. After all, it's a podcast that you're supposed to fall asleep to. But lack of sleep is a health crisis in the 21st century, and this is a podcast that is intended to help those that it can to get a restful night. Do you find yourself lying awake at night, mind spinning and emotions in turmoil with anxieties of 21st century life? Do you wake up in the middle of the night and find yourself not quite able to doze back off at 3 a.m.? I'm here to help. My name is Dave, and I'm your narrator, here to help you into a restful night. I'm someone who has struggled to sleep ever since I was a baby. My parents had sleepless nights with me for many years, and even once I got old enough not to bother them anymore, sleep has always been a struggle for me. It was surprisingly late in life that I discovered the tendency for droning male voices to act almost like a tranquilizer for me. I'd lie in bed at night listening to podcasts that I was interested in and find myself waking up when they were finished, having missed everything that I was actually trying to listen about. I eventually realized that there are apps out there and podcasts out there intended for pretty much the specific purpose of helping people to sleep. I tried a couple of sleep podcasts out and they worked very well for me, and I did realize that I've got a boring, droning male voice, so maybe I should see if I can help people out the way I've been helped. And so I started up Sleepy Time Tales. Now, every episode rather, starts out with this long intro. In the full version of the show, it's usually in the region of 15 minutes. And not everybody is fond of it, but it is there for a reason. Well, it's there for two reasons. The first one is I need to explain to new listeners, if that's their first time to join us, exactly what the purpose of the show is, and that's what I've already been doing so far. There's a second very important purpose, though, and that's for people who have been with the show for a while. Now, insomnia is almost like a habit. It's a bad habit like smoking or gambling, I guess. It's a series of bad habits and bad patterns that we create. And one of the purposes of this show is to help you to create new patterns. I'd like you, if you've been listening to the show for a while, to take this intro as an opportunity to start preparing your space for your night's sleep. Brush your teeth and have a drink of water and make sure your lights are out and make sure your room is warm but not too warm. Studies have actually demonstrated that colder rooms, or cooler rooms rather, actually help a good night's sleep. Make sure the room is not too hot and wrap yourself up in your blankets so you get comfortable rather than sleeping in a sauna. Listen to my voice and let it drone in the background as you start to get ready and get yourself into bed. Be almost already in a restful mind state before the story even actually starts. Because the stories are not the point. I choose interesting but not too interesting stories, or write interesting but not too interesting stories for the purpose to give you something to listen to, but not keep your attention. Because at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is we're trying to build a space here together. So get your blankets and build a nest or your little cave that you're trying to retreat into to get a good night's sleep. Now, as far as I know, there's a couple of different ways to engage with the show. For me, when I listen to my sleep podcasts or something that's helping me sleep, I actually need something to focus on, some kind of story or event that can keep my mind on a specific point, to stop it spinning out into stress and anxiety, to focus just enough not to resist sleep when it comes for me. So tonight's a big night for me and for Sleepy Time Tales. This is our 50th full episode. I've been doing readings for a while now for the holiday season, and trying to get my life back on track after a very, very busy December and January. But the 50th seems something quite important, so I'm returning to the subject of my first ever story, my first ever episode, and a series that's been quite popular with a number of listeners who I've heard from. The Adventures of the Young Boy Buddy, which in my first episode was based on a news story about a toddler who disappeared for 3 days and came home saying he'd been away with a bear. The story ultimately became a bit of magical realism and semi-fairy tales as this young boy met gnomes and goblins and fairies and all sorts of things. I've picked the story up with Buddy a little bit older and sort of not sure if he even remembered properly the events of his youth. So, and I think the story turned out quite nicely, so I hope people are interested in it, although obviously I hope you're not awake through the whole thing. So there's a couple of different ways to engage with the show. As I was saying, I've lost track of where I was. For me, I need something to focus on. Yes, I was saying this. I need something to focus on to not resist the embrace of a night's sleep. But some people need something a little bit more primal almost. People need white noise to sleep to, whether it's a white noise generator or the sound of waves or rain, or maybe a droning male background just quietly on, male baritone in the background just quietly droning on. But whatever the story is and however you choose to engage with it, the main thing is you need to remember is don't try to force yourself to sleep. You can't force sleep. You need to keep a light mental grip on the story, just enough that your mind is focused and not spinning, and then when sleep comes for you, you don't resist. Now, obviously, I'm hoping that you're asleep before I get to the end of the episode. But don't feel pressurized. If this is your first night with us, it may not work for you. The very idea of listening to a podcast with some strange guy droning in your ears may be something that you need a little bit of time to get comfortable with. Maybe my accent is strange to you. Maybe one episode just isn't long enough. But as I said, we're trying to create habits here, so I recommend that even if this doesn't work for you your first night or your second night, I recommend you give it actually 2, 3, maybe 3 nights. After 3 nights of listening to Sleepy Time Tales and have me drone in your ears, if it's not working for you, then maybe you're better served somewhere else, because there's options out there. I'm here to help people, but ultimately I'm not here. Well, I am here to give people the idea that maybe there's a direction that they can use to help find some sleep. But it's very important that you try to relax. If you're new to the show and prone to late nights lying staring at the ceiling, this may take a while for you. So queue up a few episodes or run through the backlog. What I tend to do with my sleep podcasts is I just let them run all night. I start with the latest episode and lie down in the dark with my earbuds in and just let them stream. I'm getting better about falling asleep timelessly, but unfortunately I'm getting worse about waking up at unfortunate times. Sometimes when I wake up at 3 a.m., my podcasts are still running and I just let the voices waft me back to sleep. Another one that's happening to me a lot lately is I wake up 30 or 60 minutes before my alarm. I usually think it's sooner than that and lie awake, but if I check the time and I see that I've got time, then I just, again, pop my earbuds back in if they've fallen out and go back to sleep. I can tell you now that sometimes that 30 minutes or 60 minutes can be the best part of my night. Allowing myself to relax completely right before the alarm is just deeply, deeply satisfying. And so you have the basic idea. You relax and you lie in the dark, and while you do that, I tell you a tale. So relax, dear listener, my nighttime friend who has elected to lie in the dark, listening to my voice. You will always be safe with me. I'm here to help you to relax, to improve your life in a small way, or maybe not so small. People don't sleep very well these days, and it makes lives harder. So I'm here to do my small part to help you in a big way. to help you to face tomorrow and the day after, well rested and better able to cope. One thing that's become central for me in the last few months, especially since I've started the show, is I want to try to live my life with kindness. I want to try to be kinder to people. It can be a little bit challenging because I'm naturally rather sarcastic, and I work in the hospitality business, which is full of people trying to test your patience. But here, in the context of Sleepy Time Tales, it's very important to me that I'm being kind to you. I want to share kindness with you. But it's all in vain if you can't be kind to yourself. Don't beat yourself up or rebuke yourself over not sleeping. Don't get tense if you just can't get yourself over the edge of sleep, even with me here in your ears trying to help. Frustration is one of the great enemies of a good night's sleep, and the intention with this podcast is to short-circuit that frustration, to distract that feeling that we get when we blame ourselves for not being able to let go and drift into the dark. So take a breath. Forgive the fact that you can't sleep and let my voice wash over you. Take another breath. Imagine the warm darkness rising up, inviting you to sleep into a better life starting tomorrow. And if you can't let go, forgive yourself and try again tomorrow. If you've had a life of insomnia, sleep is something like an enemy. But it is not your enemy. It's a natural process that we've been pulled away from by stress and life, and progress that shines bright lights in our eyes at all hours. I'm here to work with you, to create a safe space, a cocoon in which you can curl up and allow nature to take its course. So if you're still with me, thank you for staying. If you're already asleep, we'll chat again soon. And of course, you aren't hearing me, except maybe in a dream. Buddy's return. The car pulled up outside the sprawling house. I'm not sure if I ever gave a full description of the house, to be honest. It was a large ranch style, sprawling and wide with a second story. But the main feature of the house was a patio that ran around the complete four sides of the outside of the house. It was white painted and well kept with a green roof. It looked pretty old, but very well looked after. The car itself that pulled out was some nondescript sedan. I'm not sure of the make or model. It's not really important. Something probably from the early part of the 21st century. Sort of grey color. The car pulled up and a young boy got out. Aged roughly 12 years old, probably in that region, with light brown hair and dark eyes that were sharper than they seemed. He had quite a strong energy, this young boy. Sharp eyes that didn't seem to miss anything, and a sense of being quite fit and active looking. He took a long, comfortable stretch after the long drive from the train station or the bus station near the house. Looked a good look around the yard, which in many ways was very familiar from when he had grown up here when he was even smaller. He smiled at memories, playing with his mother and running up and grabbing onto her while she was hanging the washing, playing in the yard with his siblings, staying mostly out of trouble, but every now and then, as happens with rambunctious youths, there was usually some kind of action going on. He took a long, slow look around the yard and smiled at these memories, but then the smile faded slightly. Not in a sad way, but more of a thoughtful way. was as if some kind of memories were banging around the corners of his attention and he couldn't quite place them. As though dreams and daydreams of a young child were trying to break through to the memories of a young man on the cusp of teenagehood and the road to adulthood. Outside, beyond the yard, was the dense forest. Tall evergreen trees that seemed to whisper memories to him that he just couldn't quite place. They were the memory of something that he just couldn't quite grasp. Soon after his 6th birthday, Buddy's family had relocated. His mother was a veterinarian and she got a job as a vet in a town quite far away. And the whole family had relocated and moved far away from the family home where Buddy had grown up, spent his early formative years. The family home with the porch around the outside and the green roof was left in the care of Uncle Oscar, nestled in the forest, being well looked after by the older man. As he had grown older, Buddy had started to almost disbelieve the memories that were there. Had he imagined these things, or were they real events? Had he really made friends with gnomes? Had he met goblins and trolls? Had he celebrated midsummer with fairies? Almost stranger than any of that, had he really wandered in the woods with a bear when he was very, very young? All these memories seemed so impossible. It also seemed impossible that he remembered these adventures and others that had happened in the years up till he had left this house quite so clearly. Yet there was an unreality to these memories, as if he couldn't quite believe if these events had actually happened. But as he'd grown a little bit older, and you may sort of have expected that as he got older, these memories of these events would sort of fade away and he would start to doubt them, or as they say, you grow up and you put away childish things. Were these memories childish things? These memories or fantasies or daydreams, whatever these were, these things that just seemed totally impossible. But the last year or so, he'd had a stronger urge to return to that old family home. Every now and then he caught himself looking pensively. The town he lived in didn't have much in the way of forests or anything. Every time he walked past a copse of trees, he would just sort of stop and stare at it and try to come to grips with those memories of his much younger self. He didn't speak about this to anybody. He did talk to some of his other friends at school, but he didn't share these things with his parents. They would think that he was probably completely consumed by fantasy. He was an imaginative boy through his whole childhood, still with a fondness for fantasy books and ancient fairy tales of different origins. So they would think he was getting too old for these bizarre memories, these things that were just completely impossible. So he didn't share the urge with anybody, but he did say to his mother fairly frequently and to his father that he really wanted to go back to the old house for a while. Not to live or for anything long term like that, but he really wanted to go spend a short vacation with his Uncle Oscar and sort of get back in touch with the place that he knew and loved so much. The house and the yard and the woods around it. And so eventually, after much persuasion, he managed to convince his parents to let him go spend a couple of weeks during the summer holidays with Uncle Oscar. He was going to be there probably around midsummer, and this was not accidental on his part. He hadn't had the hugest amount of control about when he could go, but he sort of strongly suggested when it was. He decided to forgo summer camp that year, spend some time at home and then go away to Uncle Oscar's for about 2 weeks over the midsummer period. So he caught a bus alone. Seemed a very long trip, probably in the region of 15 hours. But Buddy was a patient young man, as he'd been a patient boy, and he'd enjoyed the trip. He'd enjoyed the changing scenery as he went the great distances from flat scrublands into the forested areas that were so familiar to what he had grown up with. He sat next to an old lady on the bus, and they'd had a wonderful conversation as they went along. She was going to see her grandchildren in a town nearby where he was going, but she was going to be getting off first. But he was pretty much the same age as the second youngest of her many grandchildren. So she seemed to take a liking to him and wanted to get to know him a little bit better. But he, for his part, was a very polite young boy with a respect for his elders, very well instilled in him by his parents. And it wasn't even politeness. The lady was very pleasant, Lady Myrtle. She was a very pleasant person, and she'd had a very interesting life. She told stories of adventures she had had. She'd had quite a fascinating life herself. She had married early, but the marriage hadn't worked out. So she'd had a second husband, and their marriage was much happier with a lot of traveling. And she had 3 children and 7 grandchildren, and Buddy the age of, in the sort of region of the youngest of them. She was going to the home of her daughter, who was hoping that Myrtle would move in with them, as they wanted her around for her grandchildren to spend some time, and were thinking that maybe it was time for her to stop gallivanting around the place. But Myrtle wasn't one for putting down roots, not after her husband had passed, and he had encouraged her sense of adventure and joy that they'd had through their entire lives. The interior of the bus was mostly brown and grey. The trip happened overnight, so eventually Myrtle fell asleep and softly snored to herself, while Buddy also had a little bit of a doze. The bus had power points, and he sat with his phone plugged in and kept in touch with his parents as he travelled, and his friends, many of whom thought it was a little bit odd that he was going away in the middle of summer holidays and foregoing camp that he had enjoyed every year before. It was around mid-morning when the bus arrived at the bus station, and the old grey sedan with his uncle Oscar, a kind older man, was waiting for him. He didn't know Oscar very well. He had come out to visit them a few times during holiday times, Christmas and Thanksgiving. They'd always gotten on very well, but Oscar had never had children, so he never really quite knew how to deal with children. Instead, what he did, he just treated them like adults, pretty much like he did, and for that reason, kids actually adored him. He treated them with a lot more respect than a lot of other adults did, because at the end of the day, he, not being a big one for children, didn't realize that normally adults treat children differently. The car was old, but it was comfortable. The interior had been luxurious once and was leather. Really real tan, and comfortable and well worn. A little bit overly worn, but much loved and clean. Oscar spoke to him about his trip and had been interested to hear about the story about Myrtle and her travels. Oscar in his youth had been in the Navy and had done quite a lot of traveling as a younger man. But the time came for him to settle down, and eventually he took over the Buddy's family's house. Partly because he wasn't sure what else to do, and it figured it was time for him to settle down, and Buddy's parents needed the help with the house. He didn't buy the house or take the house over, but he was something of a custodian of it. It was his home, and he would probably be there for the rest of his life, and very comfortable and very welcome. But he was always, and there was always a sense that he was looking after the house for the return of the family, or the return of Buddy whenever that time would come. He had had a sense the last few times he'd seen Buddy that Buddy missed the old house and missed the woods around it. He felt that inevitably the house would become Buddy's because Buddy seemed to have such a strong connection to it and to its location. When they got back to the house and Buddy had had his stretch and glanced around the yard, he went inside and went up to his old room, which looked pretty much as it had when he was younger, although without the decorations because those had gone with him. The same bed that he had always slept in was still there. A little bit smaller than he seemed to remember it, obviously, and with a very different bedclothes on it. But it was still comfortable, and he felt immediately at home lying down on it after his long trip, after dropping his luggage on the floor. But after a little bit of a lie down and maybe a nap after a very long day, he got up, picked up his bags, and unpacked everything. He packed his bags in the cupboard and went down for lunch, spent some time with Oscar. But he asked Oscar what he was doing in the workshop. Now, Oscar didn't just hang around the house all day. He was a handyman for some of the houses in the neighborhood. So he had a lot of tools and that sort of thing in the workshop. So in a lot of ways, it was pretty much like Buddy remembered it. After lunch, which was a large ham sandwich with a plate full of French fries, suitable for a growing boy and delicious and healthy, and maybe not that healthy, but very tasty, he went to poke around in the workshop. His fading, bizarre memories, unusual memories of the impossible seemed to draw him out to that workshop. The thing that looked like a barn that when he was growing up had his father's old Ford pickup truck in it. The old red truck that was constantly being tinkered on every chance his father got. But that unfortunately was sold off when they moved because it wasn't really worth leaving behind. It would probably have just fallen into a poor state, stuck in that workshop. Oscar didn't particularly want to have it around and carry on working on it himself, and it would have been too expensive to move cross country. So it had been sold off, and now it was just workbenches, various glass jars with screws and nails. The empty spot that was almost like a void where the old pickup truck had been. A lot of toolboxes and a vise and a table saw and a grinder fixed onto the bench. The workshop was dusty and musty and dimly lit. The area Oscar worked was covered in wood dust. The house itself was quite clean and well maintained, but the workshop Oscar seemed to like it to look worked in. There was nothing, no food was left, there was nothing that attracted insects, but there was a strong sense of it just being a place of work. Wood dust left on the counters, and it was comfortable, untidy yet clean. But he poked around, picked up some jars and had a look at them. He seemed to actually remember some of these jars. They looked older than him. He suspected that there were ones that his father had left behind, screws and nails that he wasn't going to move, and figured that maybe Oscar could make use of. The memories here were a lot less faint. The memories of the first time Buddy had encountered the gnomes. The memories were faint but present, so distant and dreamlike, completely impossible, yet somehow still completely clear. The unreality of them seemed to make him not want to engage with it, but he knew it happened, yet it was impossible. He put a jar down, turned around, had a look at another workbench nearby, and heard a skittering sound and something knocked the jar. The screws in it rattled against the glass, and he turned around quickly, hoping to see. Was he really hoping to see a gnome? His friend Freddie with the green hat, and the two girls, Crystal and Carol. Was he really hoping to see these gnomes, these impossible creatures? Well, whatever he was hoping, he didn't see it, because there was just a large rat had come down from the rafters and had investigated where he'd been fiddling, hoping there was some food, and had bumped the jar. As I say, Oscar didn't leave food or anything like that in the workshop, because that would be very attractive for rats. But where you get rats, you get people, and this one was willing to take a chance. But he started to feel really tired after his long day, his long bus ride, and his long car ride. Although the car ride hadn't been that long, but after the long bus ride, it had felt like a long time. He went inside and watched a little television. They had dinner, they had meatloaf, had a shower. When he had been there, they hadn't had showers. The house was very old, and his parents hadn't had chance to do any kind of renovation, so they only had a huge old bathtub. But Oscar, after moving in, had put in a shower in the main bathroom. And he had a shower when he got to bed early, because his was planning on having a early start to his morning. But he woke up in the night. It's hard to say without it sounding creepy, because it wasn't a creepy thing. He woke up in the night feeling like he was being watched. But it didn't feel creepy for him. It felt comfortable, as though he was being guarded in his sleep, looked over by someone who cared about him and was concerned for his welfare, and happy to see him. Yet there was no sign of anyone or anything in the room, and it was quite a strange feeling. The intent of nothing, positive intent of something out there in that darkness that was somehow trying to reach him, but not quite able to come to him. There wasn't any hostility or anything strange. The feeling was familiar yet forgotten. That forgotten familiarity was a feeling that was sticking quite strongly with him through this whole day so far, since he'd gotten to the house. He realized in the night that sense of being watched by someone that was curious and happy to see him had actually been with him ever since he had gotten out of the car. But he was tired, and it didn't stick with him, and he closed his eyes and he settled back into his blankets and he fell back asleep. In the morning, he woke up just after sunrise. It was an early start to the day as he got up and stretched and brushed his teeth and washed his face and got himself dressed and went down for breakfast with Oscar. They had a fairly solid breakfast, bacon and eggs and sausages and beans, and Oscar knew that Buddy was going to be taking a walk in the woods, because Buddy didn't know when he was younger but his parents had realized he was wandering off quite a lot, and they had sort of expected that he was nostalgic and missing that sense of wandering off and exploring. So Oscar was expecting him to want to go wander in the woods, so he made sure he was well fed. and had some hiking gear ready for him that his parents had asked Oscar to buy in the nearby town at the general store. But his phone was charged and he took it with him. There wasn't much signal in the forest, but it was, it's the 21st century. Phones are useful for finding your way around. GPS and a compass and that sort of thing to make sure he could find his way home. With a robust set of boots and long pants and a long sleeve shirt. It was warm, but not hot, so he was quite well covered for his protection. He'd also learned some reconnoitering in scouts, because even after leaving this welcoming forest, he'd always stayed fascinated by nature. So he'd become a scout and had multiple badges in multiple disciplines, and he was very popular with the scoutmasters and very hardworking. He ducked through the split pole fence, pretty much the same one, had been a little bit maintained since he was younger. Was a little bit easier to get in between the poles compared to when he was shorter. His long legs got above the bottom of the pole very easily, and he folded himself through the gap. It was quite different walking through the woods compared to the last time he had done it, at least the last time he had done it alone. He was much larger now. The woods were densely packed and there was a lot of undergrowth. It seemed to resist him a lot more than he seemed to remember. But then the last few times he had walked in the woods, he had done it in the company of gnomes, as he remembered, although really it couldn't have been possible. The gnomes had seemed to find a way for him, even with his short legs and stubby build, to find a way easily through. Because after all, the gnomes were very short-legged and stubby themselves. There were a few pathways in the wood, and he struggled through the clinging undergrowth. He saw a lot of animal life. In the distance, he caught a glimpse of a couple of elk. They didn't get too close, they were shy. It wasn't hunting season, but they were very nervous of the presence of people. He saw rabbits and he saw many birds, including some local crows. The crows sat high in the branches of the trees and regarded him carefully, curiously, cawing to each other and seeming to talk to somebody else out in the woods. As the day grew on, the sun got high, got hotter, and he got thirsty and he stopped for a snack and some water. He had some fresh fruit and a bit of trail mix. Good drink out of his canteen, or one of the two that he carried. He sat considering the surroundings. The sun and the shadow dappled on the ground and catching in the undergrowth and the various bushes and stuff around him. Bushes heaving and moving as animals crawled through them, often coming to have a look at him and regard him carefully or curiously, and then carefully draw away. After his short break, Buddy got up and decided to make one last little push deeper into the forest. Was he really hoping to bump into his imaginary friends out here? Yes, he was. He didn't completely believe his memories, if I'm completely honest. After all, how could he? How could he believe that this was real, that these gnomes and goblins were out there waiting for him? Well, he didn't think the goblins would be, because those never came above ground, at least as he remembered it. But he was hoping to see his friend Freddie and Crystal and Carol. He stumbled into a dry riverbed that seemed a little bit familiar. The riverbed he knew wasn't dry, at least not all the time, but they did dry out occasionally. But there was a sense of deja vu, of familiarity with the area. He looked around himself a while, looked up at the sun and the time on his watch, and thought he'd take another 15 minutes along the riverbed before turning around to return home before it got dark. So he took a walk, carefully stepping in the stones of the dry riverbed, making sure not to hurt himself and turn his ankle. He followed the river for a while, and eventually he realized he wasn't going to find what he was looking for. So he stopped and took another short break and a little short snack, waiting to see if anything would come and see him. But reality sank in, and he felt a little bit sad as nothing happened. He saw a few more birds and lizards in the woods, in the bushes. There was nothing magical about that. So he shouldered his pack and got everything else together. He turned around to head back the direction he came, back up the riverbed, when he saw a sudden, sharp movement in the undergrowth. Now, he'd seen quite a lot of sudden, sharp movements in the undergrowth up until this point, but there was something about this that was different, almost deliberate, as though it was being waved at him, as though a small hand was hanging onto a branch, pulling on it rhythmically. He squinted into the shadows under the bush, didn't see anything until suddenly a shape came out. It was a single, small male gnome, the height of Buddy's shin, staring at him intently. Green hat and reddish-brown hair and beard. Not very old-looking gnome, although Buddy knew that the appearance of gnomes was pretty much in the mind of those that looked at them. Freddy looked at him and said, I'd heard you were back, Buddy. You've gotten a lot bigger. Thanks again for joining me on this episode of Sleepytime Tales, the podcast designed around a bedtime story to help you to get a restful night. New episodes will be released every Sunday night to give you something fresh to help you rest in a new week. But make sure to subscribe in whatever service you use so that you get new episodes whenever they come out. A reminder that the music for tonight is Un Desire by Kumiku. Check out more of their work on their website and their Patreon, which you'll find linked in the show notes. Good night and sweet dreams.